You might wonder why sociologists are so interested in deviant behavior. Well, we spend the vast majority of our time examining normative expectations for behavior. And when we examine the culture, and when we examine the social structure, we tend to find that there are these very strong social forces that push people and pull people towards behaving in a very specific and certain way. Right? The impact of culture is very strong in terms of motivating our daily life and our daily behaviors within our lives. Social structure, our institutions and their arrangements are also a very strong social force that moves and shapes our behavior. So sociologists kind of wonder out loud if it is the case that so many of our social forces drive us towards conformity, how is it that we see deviance? How is it that people break free of the confines of culture, and break free of the confines of the social structural forces at play in our lives, and behave very different than the expectations for how they should behave? So we'll be studying this as we move through our 3 segments today. But first, what we should do is talk about what is deviant behavior in the first place. What do sociologists mean when we say deviant behavior? And it may be very different than how we commonly use this term, deviance. So first is to separate our definition of crime and our definition of deviance. To just give you a quick definition of crime are behaviors that violate a legal code. And crimes are part of one social institution, the social institution of government. Government creates laws, and then when people do not behave according to those laws, they break those laws and commit crime. Very simple definition of this particular type of behavior. So crime are behaviors that violate legal codes of conduct. Deviance is more complex than just crime. When sociologists talk about deviant behavior, we're looking at violations of code of conduct across a range of behaviors that are not limited to the institution of government. So deviance is still a violation of codes of conduct, but they are codes of conduct that extend beyond just the institution of government. Remember, we talked about these 5 different very important social institutions: the institution of the family, the institution of education, the institution of religion, the institution of government, and the institution of the economy. So deviance is violation of codes of conduct within all of these institutions. Right? Within all of these institutions. In addition to this, sociologists include crime as a form of deviant behavior, but we also note that often crimes are not considered deviant beyond the institution of government. Right? So crimes, lots of crimes actually, are not considered deviant by other institutions other than the institution of government. I'll give you a great example of this. Jaywalking. What is jaywalking? Can somebody give me a definition or an example of jaywalking? Go ahead. What is jaywalking? Not using the crosswalk when you cross the street. That is jaywalking. The government has passed a law that says people must use only the authorized walkways and crosswalks when traveling as a pedestrian. When you're walking along the road, when you're crossing the road, you must only use the authorized pathways and crosswalks for pedestrian use. So when you randomly decide to cross the street, and it is not on an authorized crosswalk, you are breaking a law. You are breaking a law. So, I want you to think back through your 20 to 30-something years that you've existed on this planet, and think about if you have ever crossed a road not using an authorized crosswalk? By show of hands, how many of you have crossed a road not using an authorized crosswalk? Y'all are criminals. Criminals. Lawbreakers. Right? Why is it, and you probably have not just done this once, you've probably done this lots and lots of times. Why is it that it is appropriate, or why is it that you think that it's appropriate to break this law maybe not once, maybe not a dozen times, but maybe hundreds of times throughout any given year? Why is it the case that you feel it's okay to cross a street not using an authorized crosswalk? What are some reasons? Think to yourself. Go ahead. So, you are a rational individual who is able to see in both directions and determine whether or not it's safe to cross the road, is really what you're saying, right? Yeah, absolutely. So, you have the ability to determine that it's safe. What else? Go ahead. There's nobody around to ticket you, right? Nobody around to demonstrate that you're violating the law. Very good. Go ahead.
The legal consequences are minor.
The legal consequences are minor. So not only is there typically not a police officer following you around when you're walking on the road to make sure that you are not breaking the law, but even if a police officer sees you, what is the likelihood that he or she may ticket you? So sociologists recognize that not all crimes are deviant beyond the institution of government. And then in addition to this, we also note that most forms of deviance in other institutions don't constitute criminal behavior. So when we take, for example, things like insubordination at work, you can get fired from your job for being insubordinate, for not doing the things that you're supposed to do, but it's not necessarily a crime when you don't do the things that you're supposed to do at work, right? In most cases, in fact, when you fail to do what you're supposed to do at work, it's not breaking a law. There may be some specific examples where it would be, but in the vast majority of cases, if you're working at the pizza house and you don't make enough pizzas, you're slow on orders, and you're not listening to your boss, certainly you can get fired for that. You are breaking a norm. But you're not breaking a law, right? You're not committing a crime. Misbehavior at school, right? The vast majority of misbehavior that occurs at school, you receive punishments for. You can get kicked out of the classroom. You can get yelled at by the teacher. You can get in trouble by the principal. You can get suspended or expelled or detention. Lord knows I had many days in detention, right? But for the vast majority of things that you do at school that are considered deviant, they're not considered crime, right? They're not considered crime. Then disobedience in the family, right? You can mouth off to your mom and dad. You can break the rules. You can, go out late, come home late. You can, be real mean to your brothers and sisters. Half of these things, or the vast majority of these things that you do within the family, you can receive punishments for, but they're not considered crimes. They're deviant behavior. And religious hearsay, right? At your church or your synagogue or your mosque, you can do lots and lots of things that break religious traditions, break religious rules, break religious norms, but they're not considered crimes. So deviant behavior extends beyond this notion of crime. And sociologists are concerned with crime, but we're also concerned with all of these other behaviors that happen in a wide range of institutions. So when you think about deviant behavior, absolutely include crime in that mix. But also think about how all of these other examples of behavior constitute deviance, right? They may constitute crime, right? There's lots of them that kind of constitute multiple things. There's lots of crimes like murder that also breaks norms within the family, break religious traditions, right? And also break the law. So they are deviant in multiple institutions, but there's also lots of examples where there's deviant behavior in one institution that has no connection or no relationship to other institutions, okay? So, when sociologists are examining deviant behavior, we go back to one of our bread and butter areas, which is the study of social norms. Remember that the study of social norms are expectations or codes of conduct in particular situations that help to maintain social order. So norms are important, not just because they provide rules and they provide kind of guidelines for us to behave in particular situations. They also have the net effect of creating order out of what could be chaotic. Because we have rules in the classroom, like don't talk with your neighbor, because we have rules in the classroom, like come in quietly and sit down, because we have rules in the classroom, like coming in at a certain time, keeping your books out, and waiting until the end of class, once the professor is finished, to close them up and put them away, and rules like leading in an orderly fashion, we can create something that is powerful, a social situation like a classroom where learning can occur. Without those rules or without those codes of conduct, getting 120 people in the same room could be quite a chaotic situation. So norms are very important because they help to maintain social order. In addition to norms being a general area that sociologists study, we also note that there are things called proscriptive and prescriptive norms. Proscriptive norms tell people what they should not do. And prescriptive norms are those that are ordered to tell us what we should do in any particular situation. Here's a good way to remember proscriptive and prescriptive norms. Pros rhymes with no. Proscriptive norms tell you what you should not do. Pro rhymes with no. Proscriptive norms tells you what you should not do. So there should be no talking between people during the lecture, is a proscriptive norm. Prescriptive norms are what tell you that you should do. A doctor prescribes you medication. When a doctor prescribes you medication, you better take that medication unless you get sicker, right? So prescriptive norms, you can remember that it's a prescription, and you take a prescription. Prescriptive norms tell you what you should do. You should sit quietly in class, pay attention to the lecture, and if you have questions, you should raise your hand and wait until the professor calls on you, is a prescriptive norm, right? So here's the difference between proscriptive and prescriptive norms. Norms vary according to how widely people accept them, how society enforces them, how they're transmitted from one person to another, and how much conformity they require. So when we think about proscriptive and prescriptive norms, they're not all equal, right? They're not all equal. All the rules and all the norms that are in any given social context vary. Some are enforced very heavily, right? So we can think about classroom behavior. Some classroom behaviors are enforced very heavily or very strictly. Other classroom behaviors, not so much, right? How they're transmitted. So in the classroom, sometimes norms are transmitted from professor to student, and sometimes norms are transmitted from student to student. Sometimes norms are transmitted from student to professor. Right? We all kind of learn, both formally and informally for others, by each other and from each other, the rules of behavior for the given situation. Right? How much conformity they require. Do they require strict conformity? You always have to behave in this particular way? Or are they loose conformity? Sometimes can you get away with these things, and other times you can't. So we can think about the fact that norms vary in relation to what we learned about folkways, mores, and taboos. Folkways, mores, and taboos. Really, folkways, mores, and taboos vary. They're just categories that demonstrate this broader variation of norms. How they're transmitted, how they're enforced, how much conformity they require. Folkways generally require very little conformity, and they're not enforced that much. Mores, more so, right? And then taboos are strictly enforced and require exact and total conformity. So in addition to norms, is the concept of social control. And in addition to understanding norms when we're defining deviant behavior, we also have to realize that there is social control that enforces norms. So social control really includes efforts to get conformity to rules and norms. And sometimes this is even when obedience contradicts those norms. So in the classroom, there's a norm not to crosstalk with your partner, right? Not to crosstalk with your partner. Oftentimes, the desire to crosstalk with your partner is very strong. You want to talk with this person all the time. You like this person a lot. You might think that this person is cute, whatever. You might want to talk with that person a whole bunch, throughout the class. And that might be the only time of day that you get to talk with that person. However, social control is the efforts to try to get you to not talk with that person. You might see that teachers or other classmates tell you to be quiet, remind you of this norm a whole bunch of times. They may sanction you, or they may provide some type of punishment to you for doing that. This is what social control is. It's reinforced through this sanctioning process. Maybe by formally or informally pointing people out, formally or informally delivering any particular type of punishment. So, those who provide social control are known as agents of social control. Agents of social control. And we're all agents of social control. There are formal agents of social control in different institutions. Right? In the institution of education, it's people like professors are your formal agents of social control. Your deans are formal agents of social control. The president is a formal agent of social control. But students are informal agents. You guys kind of enforce the rules with each other. In the institution of government, police and judges, probation officers, and parole officers, and correctional agents are all formal agents of social control. But we all, as citizens, informally enforce the law. In the institution of religion, your priest or your imam, your pastor, are all formal agents of social control, but all the members of the congregation are informal agents of social control. Sanctions are made by agents of social control that are intended to increase good behaviors and decrease undesirable behaviors. So sometimes we're given positive sanctions, right? Things that are supposed to enforce good behavior, and sometimes we're given negative sanctions that are supposed to decrease negative behavior. So just to give you some examples, further examples of agents of social control in the sanctioning process, here's some different institutions, right? Institution of religion. Minister and priest is going to be your formal agent of social control. The type of deviance that you're going to see is sin, right? It'll be defined as sin rather than crime. And you'll see that the sanctioning process includes things like penance, withholding rights, maybe even excommunicating a particular person if they misbehave enough. In terms of the institution of the economy, we may see different agents of social control that represent different types of groups within that institution. So for businesses, your employer is the agent of social control. And deviance includes things like work insubordination, violation of work rules, being lazy at work, being absent all the time. And sanctions include being fired, being suspended, even being fined. In addition to employers, we see professional groups Many of you will go on and become part of an association. I'm a member of the American Sociological Association, and we have our own rules and our own ethics and our own codes of conduct. So if you think about it, the agents in these different associations include people like the shop stewards or officers of associations. Deviance is failure to obey those rules of the association. And you can have things like suspension of your license. If you're going on to become some type of professional that requires a license, like a lawyer or a doctor, and you break the rules, they can take away your medical license. They can take away your license to practice. They can include expulsion from the group, being fined. Right? If we disobey union rules, we can be fined. Right? Be fined for breaking contracts. You know, if we think about the state or government, crime, and even in the family, parents are the formal agents of social control. The example of deviance is disobedience, and you can be grounded by your parents, spanked by your parents. You can be rewarded by your parents for good behavior, for positive sanctioning. So all of these things constitute different forms of deviance, different forms of social control. By show of hands, how many of y'all are following me? Wonderful, wonderful.